There are truths so dangerous they are not argued with. They are buried, not because they are weak, but because they threaten entire systems built on fear, mediation, and control. The Gospel of Thomas is one of those truths. Hidden in the Egyptian desert, sealed away in a jar, it waited beneath sand and silence while empires preached a very different religion above it. Not a religion of discovery, but of distance. Not a kingdom within, but a kingdom deferred. And maybe that is why this text still feels alive. It does not speak like a book trying to win your approval. It does not flatter the religious mind. It does not beg to be accepted by institutions. It speaks like a voice that already knows something most of the world has forgotten. It speaks like a door, a narrow, unsettling, luminous door hidden in plain sight, waiting for the few who are tired enough of illusion to finally kneel and listen. What if the most revolutionary spiritual teaching was not destroyed but hidden? What if it was buried precisely because it could not be allowed to spread too freely through a civilization built on external authority? What if the danger of Thomas was never merely theological, but existential? Because once a person realizes the kingdom is not somewhere else, once they realize the divine is not locked behind priesthoods, institutions, afterlives, or cosmic distance, they become much harder to rule through shame and spiritual dependence. The traditional mind is taught to look outward, look upward, look beyond death, look beyond the body, look beyond this moment, look to institutions, creeds, permissions, and official interpreters. But Thomas cuts across that entire structure with shocking simplicity. It does not point the seeker toward a distant throne. It points toward recognition, toward immediacy, toward a hidden nearness so intimate that most people miss it precisely because they have been trained to search everywhere except where it lives. The kingdom, Thomas suggests, is not waiting at the end of time. It is not a reward for the obedient dead. It is not a private estate in the sky for those who successfully repeated the right formulas. It is here, spread upon the earth, hidden in plain sight, breathing through reality even now. And the tragedy is not that it is absent. The tragedy is that people do not see it. They step through a living miracle every day while waiting for permission to call it sacred. Can you feel how subversive that is? Not merely comforting, not merely mystical, dangerous. Because if the kingdom is immediate, then every system profiting from your estrangement loses power. If the divine can be encountered within the pulse of consciousness itself, then the old architecture of fear begins to crack. If the living Christ is not only a distant figure to be admired, but a presence to be recognized, then religion is no longer about managed access. It becomes remembrance, and remembrance changes everything. So this is not just a historical video about an old desert manuscript. This is an excavation, not only of Thomas, but of the part of you that may already know he is telling the truth. The part of you exhausted by second-hand spirituality. The part of you tired of reaching for a God who always seems to remain elsewhere. The part of you that suspects the deepest secret was never that heaven is far away, but that what you seek has been quietly breathing inside you all along. The old religious instinct says the answer is elsewhere, somewhere above, somewhere beyond death, somewhere outside the body, outside the breath, outside the trembling confusion of ordinary life. It teaches the soul to relate to God as distance, to holiness as absence, to truth as something forever deferred. And because of that, millions spend their lives reaching upward while remaining inwardly starved. But Thomas cuts through that spell with terrifying simplicity. If they say the kingdom is in the sky, the birds will get there first. If they say it is in the sea, the fish will arrive before you. In other words, stop being fooled by distance. Stop imagining the sacred as a place that flatters your fantasy while leaving your present life untouched. The kingdom is not waiting for you elsewhere, because the first deception was elsewhere itself. How much of modern spirituality is still built on this same lie? People no longer only kneel before cathedrals. Now they kneel before screens, ambitions, identities, purchases, ideologies, and endless self-construction. They still look outside themselves for permission to feel whole. They still wait for arrival. They still imagine salvation as a future event instead of a present unveiling. The scenery changed. The exile remained. That is why the external deity keeps failing you. Not because the divine is unreal, but because distance was never the truth. The problem is not God. The problem is misdirection. The problem is a mind trained to chase symbols while ignoring substance. A soul trained to perform belief while remaining cut off from direct participation in living presence. Thomas does not comfort that illusion. He destroys it. And that destruction is mercy. Because an external God can always be postponed, always mediated, always managed by someone else. But a kingdom already within and spread upon the earth is far more demanding. It asks you to awaken now. It asks you to see now. It asks you to stop hiding behind borrowed spirituality and discover whether the divine can be encountered without the machinery of religious dependence. That is a harder teaching than heaven later. It is harder because it removes excuses. It leaves you alone with breath, awareness, attention, and truth. No performance, no spiritual theater, no endless deferral into tomorrow. Just this piercing possibility. What if the veil is not cosmic distance, but your own refusal to look where you have been taught not to look? What if the kingdom has been closer than your theology? What if the reason so many remain spiritually exhausted is not that God has withdrawn, but that they keep searching in directions designed to keep them powerless? The old structures told you to wait. Thomas tells you to see. The old structures told you to obey. Thomas tells you to recognize. One creates dependence, the other births remembrance. And remembrance begins when you stop exporting your soul. When you stop looking to the horizon for what is hidden in the center. When you stop begging the sky for what is breathing through this moment. When you stop asking the external world to validate what only inner seeing can reveal. Then the question changes. It is no longer where is the kingdom. It becomes what in me is finally willing to notice it. There is one temple you carry everywhere, not made of stone, not controlled by gatekeepers, not owned by institutions. It opens in secret 1,000 times a day without asking your permission. It rises, it falls, it enters, it leaves, and most people barely notice it. The breath is so near that it has become invisible. That may be why it has remained one of the holiest neglected realities in human life. Every breath is a visitation. It arrives unearned. You do not manufacture it. You receive it. Even when you believe yourself self-made, breath exposes the illusion. Life is entering you moment by moment. A rhythm older than your plans, older than your opinions, older than the identities you defend. Before you speak, perform, worry, or strive, you are being breathed. And that changes the whole atmosphere of this teaching. Because the kingdom is not merely a concept hidden in old sayings. It is an immediate pulse, a living nearness. something that can be sensed when the noise drops enough for you to feel the sacred intimacy of respiration itself. The breath is not the kingdom in a simplistic sense, but it is a doorway, a bridge, a gentle and ever-present invitation back to the center. When was the last time you breathed like it mattered? Not as a technique, not as a productivity tool, not as a wellness trend, but as revelation, as sacrament, as contact. The modern person uses breath to survive stress. The awakened person begins to discover that breath is also a teacher. It shows how life moves without grasping. It shows how receiving and releasing belong to the same holy motion. Thomas is full of sayings that sound like riddles. But what if many of them are not meant merely to be decoded by the intellect? What if they are meant to be entered through a slower state of being? A state where the mind softens, the senses stop lunging outward, and something subtler begins to hear. Breath is what makes that possible. It slows the surface turbulence enough for the hidden current to become feelable. This is why the breath is feared by a distracted civilization. A person who can return to breath can return to center. A person who can return to center becomes harder to manipulate through panic, harder to colonize with endless urgency, harder to fragment through noise. Conscious breathing is not only calming, in the deepest sense it is rebellious. It interrupts the world's attempt to keep awareness permanently scattered. And notice how humble the doorway is. Not rare visions, not elite initiation, not secret access granted by the spiritually approved. Breath. The thing you have been doing since the beginning. The thing you will do until the end. The thing so common that the ego ignores it, which may be exactly why the kingdom hid itself there. What pride overlooks, grace often chooses. So the journey begins to simplify. Not because the mystery is small, but because it is intimate. You do not need to leave the body to begin. You do not need to abandon this moment. You do not need to wait for perfect conditions. The next breath is enough to start. The next inhale is enough to listen. The next exhale is enough to loosen the veil just a little and ask what has been quietly living here all along. Most people notice the inhale and the exhale. Few notice the pause. That tiny hush between movements is so brief, the mind usually steps over it without reverence. Yet that pause carries a strange atmosphere. The breath comes in, the breath goes out, and between those motions there is a still point, a suspension, a gap where doing has not yet resumed. It is small, but it is not empty. It is subtle, but it is not nothing. The ancients understood that fullness is not always loud. The Pleroma was never merely a distant heavenly landscape. At its deepest meaning, it is divine fullness itself. Not the cluttered fullness of accumulation, but the unbroken completeness beneath fragmentation. And strangely, the soul can begin to sense that fullness in the places where its own internal machinery briefly stops. In the pause, something deeper than striving becomes detectable. What if fullness is not something you create? What if it is something you stop interrupting? The modern mind assumes that meaning must be generated through effort, motion, and intensity. But the pause between breaths offers a quieter revelation. It suggests that the deepest reality does not need your agitation to exist. It is already here, waiting beneath the turbulence. The pause is not the whole of the Pleroma, but it is a taste of its atmosphere. This is why stillness can feel uncomfortable, not because it is empty, but because it exposes how addicted the ego has become to movement. Noise gives the false self something to do. Stillness gives it nowhere to hide. In the pause, there is no drama to feed on, no identity to advertise, no immediate task to cling to. That can feel unsettling at first, but beyond the discomfort is an almost unbearable gentleness. Have you ever felt a room change when you finally became quiet? Have you ever noticed that after the breath settles, the whole world can suddenly feel wider? The walls are still there. The problems may still exist. Yet something in the atmosphere opens. That is not fantasy. That is what happens when awareness stops thrashing long enough to notice the field it has always been moving inside. The kingdom becomes less theoretical there. Thomas does not hand you a system of metaphysical diagrams. He hands you sayings that destabilize the surface mind and force you nearer to direct recognition. The pause helps that happen, because without stillness, the sayings remain clever phrases. With stillness, they begin to act like keys. The kingdom within and without. The single one. The hidden treasure. These are no longer religious slogans. They begin to breathe. And this matters in 2026 more than most people realize. The current age trains human beings to fear unoccupied attention. Every silence is filled. Every pause is invaded. Every empty moment is treated like a failure of stimulation. But the pause is precisely where the deepest teaching begins to become real. The world treats it as wasted space because the world does not know what to do with a person who has rediscovered interior fullness. So learn to honor the gap, not by forcing it, not by turning it into another performance, just by noticing it. Let the inhale arrive, let the exhale leave, and then feel that tiny threshold where nothing needs to happen for a moment. In that hush, the soul begins to remember that the fullness it has been chasing may have been waiting quietly in the places where it finally stopped trying to become more than what it already is. The Gospel of Thomas does not speak like ordinary religion. It does not lecture you into obedience. It does not construct a tidy system that flatters the rational mind. It speaks in fragments, shocks, inversions, and paradoxes. It sounds almost like someone scattering sparks into dry fields, trusting that the right heart will catch fire. That is because these sayings are not meant merely to inform. They are meant to interrupt. A true saying does not always soothe you first. Sometimes it disturbs. Sometimes it confuses the surface mind so the deeper mind can wake up. Thomas knows that the ego loves clear categories when those categories allow it to remain in control. So the sayings slip past control. They unsettle fixed perception. They dismantle the lazy assumption that truth can be stored like furniture in the intellect and admired from a distance. This is why one saying can feel like a threshold. The kingdom is inside of you and outside of you. That is not a riddle for amusement. It is a blade. It cuts through false binaries. It destroys the habit of imagining the sacred as merely internal fantasy or merely external object. It tells you that the kingdom is not locked in psychological subjectivity nor trapped in external geography. It saturates reality but must be recognized. Then there are the sayings about becoming one, the single one, the undivided I, the child, the one who finds and is disturbed and astonished and reigns. These are not abstract mystical decorations. They are instructions aimed at healing fragmentation. Thomas keeps returning to the same hidden law. Division clouds sight. Inner multiplicity keeps the soul scattered. Gnosis is not merely knowing more. It is becoming less divided. Why would truth speak this way? Because argument alone cannot carry you across a threshold of being. You can win debates and still remain inwardly asleep. You can master language and still miss reality. Thomas aims deeper than belief. He aims at perception, at consciousness, at the part of you that does not need more explanation so much as a rearrangement of sight. The sayings are less like doctrines and more like spiritual instruments. That is why they must be breathed, not just analyzed. Read them too quickly, and they become strange old lines. Enter them slowly, with silence, with attention, with the breath soft and the body receptive, and something begins to happen. The saying stops being an object and becomes an event. It starts reading you. It reveals where you are divided, where you are clinging, where you are still mistaking distance for holiness. This is the genius of Thomas. He refuses to let the seeker remain comfortable in second-hand faith. He does not want admiration, he wants encounter. He wants the listener to realize that truth is not something to be displayed as spiritual sophistication. It is something that remakes the one who hears it. That is why the sayings can feel severe. They are not interested in your religious vanity. They are interested in your awakening. So stop asking only what the sayings mean. Ask what they are doing. What are they striking? What are they loosening? What are they exposing in you? Why do they keep returning you to simplicity, wholeness, direct seeing, and the collapse of false separation? Once you ask that, the text comes alive. It stops being an old manuscript and becomes a living set of instructions for the soul's return to immediacy. One of the strangest and most beautiful currents in Thomas is likeness. Not likeness as imitation in the shallow moral sense, not copying mannerisms, not performing holiness until others approve. Something deeper, resonance, twinship. The sense that the divine is not merely to be admired from a ceremonial distance, but recognized through an awakened correspondence within the soul itself. This is dangerous language to every system built on permanent separation. Because if Christ remains only external, you can worship forever without transformation. You can project perfection outward and remain inwardly divided. You can build institutions around reverence while never allowing the living pattern to take shape within your own breath, perception, and being. But Thomas keeps moving in the opposite direction. He presses toward recognition, toward sameness of frequency, toward the collapse of estrangement between the seeker and the living reality being sought. What does it mean to become a twin to the living one? It does not mean inflating the ego until it imagines itself divine. It means the opposite. It means becoming so inwardly undivided that the false layers lose their grip. It means allowing breath, awareness, and truthfulness to draw the soul into coherence. Not egoic grandeur, but alignment. Not fantasy, but resemblance born from nearness. The living Christ within is not a slogan. It is the possibility that the deepest structure of reality can become legible in you. That the pulse of the source can be recognized not only above history, but through the awakened center of a human life. That the words of Thomas are not calling you to admiration alone, but to participation. To become so transparent that what was always true can finally move through you without distortion. How would such a person live? Not as a spiritual celebrity, not as a collector of mystical experiences, but as someone less divided, less reactive, less easily swallowed by false urgency, more present, more whole, more grounded in silence without becoming passive, more capable of compassion without becoming sentimental. The true mark of inner Christic likeness is not display, it is integrity of being. This is why breath matters again here, because every divided person breathes from fragmentation. The body tells the truth before the mouth does. Tight chest, collapsed throat, nervous rhythm, shallow panic. But as the breath becomes conscious, something begins to reorganize. The body starts to receive a different message. The mind starts to lose some of its tyranny. A deeper rhythm becomes available. Twinship begins in part as a new kind of coherence. The world does not want coherent people. It wants overstimulated performers who can be sold new identities forever. It wants spiritual consumers who stay fascinated but never transformed. A person becoming a twin to the living one interrupts that machinery. They stop needing counterfeit grandeur. They stop worshipping separation. They begin to live as if the divine pattern is not merely above them, but quietly awakening through them. And that may be the hidden scandal of Thomas. Not that it honors Christ too highly, but that it dares to suggest the human being was made for participation rather than permanent distance. That the goal is not endless unworthiness, but inner recognition. Not self-worship, but self-transparency. Not egoic deification, but the end of exile through likeness. In that light, the living kingdom is not theory. It is resemblance becoming conscious. If the kingdom is this near, why is it so rarely noticed? Because forgetfulness has become a system, not merely an accident, not merely human weakness. A whole civilization now runs on exported attention. Your awareness is pulled outward from the moment you wake. Notifications, anxieties, identities, performance loops, desires, outrage cycles, comparison spirals, algorithmic hooks. The world does not need to destroy your interior life if it can keep it permanently interrupted. This is the new veil. Not only dogma, though dogma still matters. Not only empire, though empire never really vanished. The new veil is saturation, a constant flood of stimuli strong enough to keep the deeper signal from becoming audible. The soul does not always lose itself through obvious evil. Often, it loses itself through endless minor occupations. 1,000 fragments replacing one center. That is why attention has become spiritual ground. What owns your attention begins to shape your reality. What repeatedly captures your awareness begins to define your sense of self. And if attention never returns inward, the kingdom remains theoretical, no matter how much sacred language you consume. This is why people can watch spiritual content all day and still remain existentially starved. They are informed, but not recollected. The world rewards fragmentation because fragmentation is profitable. A divided person buys more, panics more, compares more, obeys more, clings more. A recollected person becomes difficult to monetize through fear, difficult to manipulate through manufactured urgency, difficult to trap inside synthetic identities. This is why inner stillness is not just personal healing. It is quiet resistance. It is refusal to let your center be permanently outsourced. Look honestly at the rhythm of your life. How often is silence interrupted before it can deepen? How often is the breath ignored until stress turns it into emergency? How often do you reach for noise the moment an opening appears? These are not small habits. They form a worldview. They train the body to believe that being is unsafe unless constantly filled. They train the soul to fear its own interiority. Thomas speaks into that condition with brutal relevance. Stop looking to the sky. Stop looking to the sea. Stop imagining the answer lives only in the next place, the next feed, the next achievement, the next identity revision. The kingdom is present, but presence cannot be recognized by a self that has been trained to live only in reaction. Before revelation becomes mystical, it often becomes practical. Recover your attention. That is the war in 2026. Not only politics, not only economics, not only AI, speed and collapsing institutions. The deepest battle is over whether human beings will remain capable of undivided awareness, whether they will still know how to inhabit a breath, whether they will still recognize stillness as something other than emptiness, whether they will still remember that consciousness is more than a target market. So if you want to find the living kingdom, begin there. Begin with what keeps stealing you from yourself. Begin with the subtle addictions to urgency. Begin with the compulsive need to fill every gap. Begin with the exported life. Because the kingdom is not hidden by complexity nearly as much as it is hidden by scattering. Gather your attention, and the veil already begins to thin. It is one thing to feel truth in stillness. It is another to carry it into traffic, deadlines, grief, conflict, screens, money pressure, broken relationships, and the general psychic weather of modern life. Many people can taste peace in ideal conditions. Much fewer can remain inwardly anchored when the world becomes loud. That is where Thomas becomes more than inspiration. That is where the teaching must become practice. Living Gnosis does not mean escaping the world. It means refusing to let the world define the deepest layer of you. It means breathing without surrendering your center. It means pausing before reaction hardens into identity. It means remembering, in the middle of interruption, that the kingdom is not cancelled because the room is noisy. The sacred is not fragile in the way the ego imagines. But your attention is. So attention must be trained. The practice is deceptively simple. When stress rises, return to breath. When the mind starts building its usual kingdom of worry, return to breath. When anger wants to become your whole reality, return to breath. Not as escapism, as re-entry, as recollection. The breath becomes the thread back to the living center from which wiser action can actually emerge. Without that, you are mostly reacting from exile. This changes the quality of action itself. You begin speaking less from panic and more from presence, less from inner fragmentation and more from coherence. You do not become passive, you become less possessed. There is a difference. The world often mistakes frenzy for power, but real power has spaciousness in it. It can pause, it can see, it can respond instead of merely discharge accumulated tension into the nearest target. Salvation looks different in this light. Not merely an event after death, not merely a doctrinal status, but the immediate collapse, however brief at first, of the illusion of separation. Every breath consciously inhabited becomes a tiny act of salvation. Every return from distraction to presence becomes a tiny resurrection. Every refusal to let fear define the whole field of awareness becomes a practical form of liberation. Can you remember the kingdom in the middle of interruption? That is the question now. Not whether you understand Thomas intellectually, not whether you can explain Pleroma, Logia, or inner Christ language. Can you remember in the real places? In conflict, in overstimulation, in fatigue, in uncertainty? Can you remain inwardly undivided while everything around you tries to recruit your nervous system into its own chaos? This is where sternness becomes compassion. Because the truth is, many people are waiting for a grand awakening while neglecting the small doorway constantly open in front of them. Breathe, pause, return, notice, refuse the exported life. These are not small things. They are revolutionary when practiced consistently. The kingdom is not absent because your day is ordinary. It is hidden in the ordinary until the ordinary is finally seen. So live the teaching where you actually are. Not only in meditation, not only when listening to sacred music, not only in moments of beauty. Live it in the email you are about to send, in the conversation you are dreading, in the room where everyone is fragmenting, in the moment before compulsion takes over. That is where the hidden gospel proves itself, not in fantasy, but in embodiment. The ego is always negotiating with time. Later it says, after I heal more, after life calms down, after I become more disciplined, after I understand everything, after I am finally worthy, time becomes its favorite hiding place, because as long as truth is postponed, nothing essential has to change now. Thomas does not grant that luxury. He keeps pressing revelation into the present tense. The kingdom is not merely coming, it is. It is spread upon the earth. It is hidden in plain sight. It is woven through breath, perception, stillness, and the very field in which you are reading these words. The problem is not delay. The problem is non-recognition. Human beings walk through living presence while narrating their exile. They inhale miracle and call it ordinary because they no longer know how to see. What if this inhale is already inside the answer? What if the next pause contains more truth than another year of reaching? What if the life you keep calling just my normal day is taking place inside a reality saturated with hidden kingdom? The point is not naive positivity. The world remains full of grief, distortion, and cruelty. The point is that none of that has successfully erased the deeper field in which it occurs. This is why Thomas feels so alive right now. He refuses the narcotic of postponement. He refuses the cheap comfort of distance. He insists that the kingdom is not waiting to begin after your life is finally in order. It is the deeper dimension of life itself. To awaken to it is not to deny the pain of the world. It is to refuse the lie that pain is the deepest thing. It is not. And something in you already knows this. Why else does beauty sometimes hurt? Why else does silence sometimes feel familiar? Why else does a certain kind of stillness feel less like acquiring something new and more like returning to something nearly forgotten? These are not random emotional glitches. They are traces, signals, remnants of a deeper belonging surfacing through the static. The living kingdom does not arrive with spectacle for most people. It arrives as a subtle but unmistakable change in atmosphere. A softer chest, a quieter mind, a widening of perception, a release of unnecessary urgency, a strange intimacy with existence, a sense that the boundary between self and source was never what fear claimed it was. The world remains visible, but it no longer feels quite so sealed. This is why every breath can become remembrance. Not because breath is magical in a shallow sense, but because conscious breath interrupts exile. It brings awareness home. It reveals that life is happening now, contact is possible now, the kingdom is near now. The mind wants abstractions, the soul wants immediacy. Thomas sides with immediacy. That is why his words still unsettle the spiritually lazy and awaken the spiritually hungry. So stop waiting for the holy to begin. It already has. Stop speaking of the divine as though it were endlessly absent. Stop narrating life as if the deepest reality were somewhere else. Sit inside the next breath and ask, with brutal honesty and childlike openness, whether the kingdom might already be pressing gently against your awareness, asking not for belief alone, but for recognition. We have traveled from a buried gospel to a living doorway, from the desert jar to the lungs, from old sayings to present breath, from an external deity always kept at a distance to a kingdom so near it can be missed by those who keep searching only elsewhere. And if one truth has been breathing beneath every chapter, it is this: what you seek is not far from you. The kingdom is not asking you to perform. It is not asking you to become spiritually dramatic. It is not asking you to chase an experience. It is asking you to become still enough to notice, to soften enough to receive, to breathe enough to remember. The living Christ within the rhythm of being does not arrive through force. It reveals itself when force begins to loosen. So for a moment, let everything simplify. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw soften. Let the face unclench. Inhale gently through the nose without trying to make it special. Exhale slowly and naturally. Then notice the tiny hush at the end of the breath. Rest there for just a moment, not straining, not analyzing, just allowing the pause to be what it is. Again, breathe in. Feel the breath arrive like a gift rather than a possession. Exhale and let the body grow a little quieter. Notice the space inside the chest. Notice the silence underneath the mind's commentary. Notice that you do not need to manufacture presence. You only need to stop fleeing it. The kingdom does not have to be dragged into the room. It was already here. And now, quietly, receive these words. The kingdom is not far from me. The breath is opening what fear tried to close. I do not have to chase the source. I return to it now. The living silence is already here. With each breath, I remember. Let those words settle gently. Do not force belief. Do not try to create an emotion. Let them fall into you like seeds into still water. If peace comes, receive it. If only quiet comes, receive that too. If resistance appears, let it soften without war. This is not a performance. This is return. This is the holy simplicity the world trained you to overlook. And for the remainder of this video, sit in stillness. Do not measure anything. Do not chase results. Just breathe, soften, and remain. Let every inhale become receiving. Let every exhale become release. Let the pause become a doorway. And let the living kingdom, which was never truly absent, reveal itself within your own breath.